Welcome to the Livestock Podcast brought to you by the Beef and Forage Center here at the University of Tennessee. I'm Bruno Pedreira, Center Director and the UT Extension Forage Specialist, joined today by Dr. Katie Mason, our UT Extension Beef Specialist.
Hey, how are you doing today,
Oh, doing great, right? We just need some rain, Tennessee, but
yeah, that's right. Enjoying the weather, but it's a little dry.
We are getting there. Today, we are very excited here to welcome, kind of back because he was here in the first episode with us. We have Dr. Troy Roman here, Assistant Professor and Extension Specialist in Beef Genetics from the University of Tennessee Animal Science Department. Troy, let's talk a little bit about genetics today, but to start it off, I want you to tell us how a farm boy from Taylor County in Iowa became our beef cattle specialist here at the University of Tennessee.
Yeah, good to be with you guys again, Bruno and Katie. I guess I have a little bit of a different track that I took to get to this position. I grew up in Southwest Iowa, right on the Missouri border, grazing fescue. So fescue does go all the way over into Iowa, that far west.
That's kind of the end of the fescue belt.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we're right on the edge, but certainly cattle up in that part of the world, sort of in the tier counties in Iowa where it's not responsible to row crop every square inch. But grew up around Charolais cattle. My family's been in Southwest Iowa since sort of the mid to late 1800s. And so I guess I got sick of the winters and continually started moving south. But I thought for a little bit that I wanted to be a human medical doctor. Did my undergraduate training at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. Took a little bit different path there, but quickly realized that I didn't want to be taking care of people in a medical setting. I missed the cows, but got bit by the research bug. So ended up headed down the genetics research path. Got to do my PhD at the University of Missouri, and really just was all in on doing beef cattle genetics work. All of the time that I spent riding around in the truck with my dad as a kid, he was an ABS rep. So I had sire catalogs all the time. I'd memorize bull EPDs because I was a little nerd.
I can see this.
Yeah. Some things never change.
Nerd,
Yeah. And so it was just sort of logical, and I made that as sort of what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. So I did my PhD at Missouri, and right after I finished that up, January of 2021, I came to UT with a research and extension appointment, and I've been here ever since. And I love the winters in Tennessee are what keep me around. So no need to go back to Iowa for winter by any means.
Yeah, I never went to Iowa during the winter time, but I went there in the springtime, and you guys still had snow all over. Said, man, the winter here should be tough.
Yeah, exactly. No, you'll never hear me complain about weather in Tennessee.
That's great.
Except we could use some rain today.
We could use some rain. Yeah. I thought it was your great coworkers that was keeping you here, but that's okay. The weather's good too.
Oh, that too. Ken.
So you talked a little bit about your appointment. You have a really great research program, but you do also a great job translating that to extension outputs and extension communication. So we know there's a lot to be done to improve genetics across the board, but specifically in Tennessee. Can you talk a little bit about crossbreeding and how we can use that to improve our genetics here?
Yeah, this anybody that's heard me talk, this is about my favorite thing to talk about. Bruno said that we have to get this done in less than a half an hour. I could talk for 3 hours about crossbreeding. But I think it's one of these things we always talk about not having silver bullets, not having, solve all solutions. But it really, in my opinion, from a genetic standpoint, is as close as we can get to that, right? Crossbreeding is so powerful, and it doesn't cost anything extra to do, right? You're not having to go out and handle cattle again, right? It's simply bringing a different breed into the mix, and the advantages that you get from that. Not only are you able to sort of match up the weak points of one breed with another, we call that breed complementarity. Bruno's from Brazil originally, right? And in his part of the world, having cattle without that heat adaptation that we get in a Bos Indicus sort of setting, they just don't live, right? You plop an Angus animal down there, and they're not going to be able to survive, right? So that's where this breed complementarity comes in. You can sort of mix and match the strengths and weaknesses of breeds together. Did you have something there, Bruno? Or not?
No, I think that's the same way I wouldn't make through the winter in Iowa. The Angus bull would not make through the summer in Brazil, right?
No, exactly. That's what I say. I don't have a year.
He may hang in there, but he's not going to be working for us.
Yeah,
that's the main point.
Not going to be breeding cows. Yeah. So again, we get this advantage of complementarity, but on the other side of that, we also get this phenomenon of heterosis, right? So this is where It's sometimes called hybrid vigor, where that crossbred offspring overperforms what we'd expect compared to the parents. So our agronomy focused people, right, the corn breeders and soybean breeders, they know all about making hybrids, right? And we can do something similar in cattle with our different breeds, right? And the important thing to keep in mind is that there are two main drivers of the amount of heterosis that you generate. Number one is how diverged are the two breeds that you're breeding together. An Angus and a Red Angus is going to give you a fairly small amount of heterosis. An Angus and a Brahman, or an Angus and a Nelore, if you're in Brazil, you get an enormous amount of heterosis in that offspring. Right. And the other thing that is probably the most important to producers in the state of Tennessee is the traits that are the most lowly heritable. So they have the lowest amount that's controlled by genetics. Those experience the biggest boost due to heterosis. So when we think about cow fertility and longevity and health, these are really lowly heritable traits. Maybe 5 or 10% come from genetics normally, but we can see advantages upwards of 20 or 25% in heterosis in that crossbred female. Yep.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think we can explore it a little bit more, and going along these lines, Troy, when you were thinking that we want to improve, right? Because coming from a livestock farmer, I think that's what we do when we have cows, right? You wanna always that the next generation is going to be better than the one you have right now. So and some farmers, they will do it better. Some of them will not do that good. Sometimes we just get so use it with some of the animals, right? And we like them, and so we don't want to sell them, but there is a need to replace these animals and make it work and go like this. So what are, if we are talking about selecting maternal traits to improve our cow herd, think like cow fertility, maturity weight, milk production, right? How can we do this? How important is to thinking on these traits for a long-term perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Bruno. And so often we get wrapped up in traits that are revenue generating. I'm going to sound like an economist here, right? But yeah, exactly. But we think about profitability, which is what we're striving for in a beef operation. And there's two pieces to that, right? Two sides to that coin. One is revenue, and we're pretty good, I think, at selecting and managing for revenue generating traits. We need live calves and we need pounds of calf to sell at weaning in most of our Tennessee operations. And I think that we've done a really good job of that over the past however many years. If you look at genetic trends across our state, across the country, we're steadily ticking up in those traits, I think because they're easy to see and easy to measure the increases from year to year, right? I sold more pounds at the end of the year. I got a bigger check, right? The tricky thing, but just equally or maybe even more important to overall profitability in a cow-calf herd are these female traits, right? So if you're retaining replacement females, you're putting a big amount of investment into keeping that female around. If she struggles on things like fertility, if she has poor feet and legs, poor udder structure, poor disposition, anything that would make her leave the herd early, that's going to cut away at our profitability. And you flip around to, year in and year out maintenance. These bigger cows, you guys are forage and nutrition specialists respectively. We know that big cows tend to eat more grass, right? Yeah. And so as we think about overall herd profitability, considering mature weight as a trait that needs to be in our selection objective is really, really important. I would much rather stock a few extra 1,200 pound cows than keep around a bunch of 1,700 pound cows, right? Yeah, there's a real difference there, and something that we could stand to put a little bit more emphasis on.
Good. Still on the cows, one thing that I'd like you to mention for a minute here is sometimes we visit a farm and a farmer will say, well, this cow has been here for 8 years, 10 years, 11 years. And sometimes we are proud of this, right? Because it is a good animal. It's giving me a calf every year. But when you think about the genetic gains, maybe in 3, 4, 5 years, you have heifers that are much better than their mothers, right? So how do you manage this? For how long should I have a cow still in my herd, knowing that I'm producing heifers that they must be better than the cows, right?
Yeah. No, that's a really great question, and it takes there's a little bit of nuance to that, right? So it really depends if we're thinking about a commercial herd or a seed stock herd, right? Our commercial herds, we want to keep cows along as long as they're having a calf, right? If they're on a 365-day calving interval, they're doing their job, they're showing up to work, they're getting bred and having a calf. We want to keep that cow around. Our ag econ department, Chris Boyer, has done some really good work on sort of how long it takes a cow to pay off her development costs and her annual maintenance cost. And what Chris and his group have found is that, again, depending on the variable cost of a cow on a per year basis, it typically takes until year 5 or 6, calf 5 or 6 rather, that cow has actually paid off those development costs. So any cow that you're getting rid of in a commercial operation before she's reached that payback period, you're probably losing money on that cow. And so for commercial herds that are interested in making genetic gain, almost all of that is going to come from the bull side of things, right? We can stand to keep an older cow along because she's paid off and she's making us money. But ensuring that we're keeping high quality genetics on the bull side, that's going to be the major driver of genetic gain in those commercial herds, right? It becomes a little bit fuzzier in a seed stock operation where you're interested in churning generations around. Some of the really high octane, high end seed stock operations will do embryo transfer and in vitro fertilization, sometimes using really young heifers, knowing that they're getting the newest genetics back out there and multiplied, right? But for our commercial producers, cow longevity is the single most important economically relevant trait. So we've got to do all that we can to make sure that we're advancing that, because that's how we make sure that we're profitable, is those cows that are able to stay in the herd past their payback period.
It's a good way to see this.
Yeah. So, and I'm glad we kind of started to transition over to the bull side. Let's think about that a little bit. So it's a long-term investment in that we're selecting genetics that will be in our herd for a while, even if that bull doesn't stick around for a long time, right? But you said making sure that we're keeping high quality bulls. So what does that really look like? What is a high quality bull? How do we select those?
Yeah, I think that's the gist of what we do in the commercial business from a genetics perspective, is making sure that we get the bull buying decision right. I always, in my presentations, I'll put up a figure that says that in one bull herds, which is the majority of operations in Tennessee, your last 3 bull purchases are responsible for 90% almost of the genetics of your current calf crop. So getting a bull buying decision right has a multi-generational impact on a herd, right? A bull that you're keeping daughters out of, that's going to continue to perpetuate through the herd as you look forward, right? So getting the bull buying decision right is really important, because we get it wrong and an issue, right? For example, you go out and select a bull, invest a large amount of money up front in this bull.
That's a lot of money, yeah.
And all of a sudden, in year 3, his replacement female daughters are starting to have feet and leg problems, right? You're having to cull them far before they reach that payback period. All of a sudden, that bull we put a big investment of money in has created issues for us. He's made all of his daughters unprofitable, and it's too late for us to do anything about it, right? So Katie, you mentioned something about the risk and the impact that this bull buying decision has on a commercial operation. We've got selection tools that help us mitigate that risk, right? So we talk a lot about EPDs, expected progeny differences. EPDs help us mitigate that risk by giving us an estimate of the genetics that we would expect that bull will pass down to its offspring. So it reduces some of the guesswork and going out, making a big upfront purchase, right? We're investing a large amount of money. We're a little bit more confident in what we're going to get from a genetics perspective when we're using selection tools like EPDs and selection indexes.
That's great, Troy. Troy, and I think about this, and especially in Tennessee, you already mentioned that most of the operations have only one bull, right? We are talking about a state where we have 30, 35 animals on average in each operation. So if you have 30, 35 cows, you are not going to have 2 or 3 bulls there, right? First, we cannot afford. The second, it's not manageable. We don't need that. So how often do we need to replace that bull? When would you be concerned and say, yeah, we need to start to think in the next generation?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky question. And in the one bull herds really, I think sometimes hold us back from doing some of these things like crossbreeding, from making sort of intentional terminal and maternal breeding decisions. But the biggest and most obvious thing is once a bull is out there and potentially covering his daughters, that starts to introduce issues with inbreeding, right? We really want to avoid making sire-daughter matings at all costs.
Sure.
So herds that are keeping replacement females back out of bulls, we really need to be cycling that bull out before he has an opportunity to go back and breed his daughters. The plus side of that, right, is that bull at age 4 is still probably has a little bit of value left to him, right? He's got at least another breeding season or two in before he needs to be moved on from. In the current market, having a 2,000-pound bull that's still a pretty good chunk of change at the sale barn.
Yeah.
And we need to be cycling through to avoid those sire-daughter matings. There's some ways that we can rotate through breeds, even in single bull herds, that allow us to take advantage of crossbreeding and heterosis. So again, it's going to depend from place to place. Maybe you go through and you artificially inseminate those daughters, right? You can keep that bull around for a little bit longer in
another
that
season.
case. Yeah. So there's no one size fits all approach, but again, I'm generally a fan of if we can turn over bulls every couple of years, that keeps the genetics fresh, avoids those sire-daughter matings, and you're taking advantage of the most sort of up-to-date and advanced genetics that there are out there.
Awesome. No, that's great. That's great. Out of the things you have been traveling all around Tennessee, right? Is there any other traits or characteristics in Tennessee specifically that you have been seeing that you'd like to share with us today as well? The things that you can change or you can do different based on your experience in these, how many years? 3 years, 3.5 years in Tennessee?
3.5 years, yeah. I think that Tennessee, again, we're probably not crossbreeding at nearly the rate that we should be.
Okay.
I would say that far less than half of our commercial operations are doing any sort of organized crossbreeding, right?
Okay.
And so, again, that's a really simple thing that could pay off in a big way, not just in that immediate boost in performance that you get out of a calf crop, but as we retain those replacement females in our herds, crossbreeding a little bit more goes a really, really long ways. And the other thing that I'd point out is thinking about the unique environment in which we're raising these cattle and trying to find genetics that match that environment is really, really important. So an animal that's raised on the high plains is not necessarily going to succeed when we bring them into Tennessee and ask them to perform, right?
Especially consider the Fescue Belt, right? Let's talk a little bit on this. If you bring animals from out of the Fescue Belt, what will be your concern, even if you're bringing really nice genetics?
Yeah, no, and I think that anybody who's imported genetics from the high plains out west, who's not been exposed to fescue, there are some really immediate, acute things that happen to that animal, right? So I'm sure Dr. Schrick has talked about this on the podcast, right? Bringing bulls in from out west can be problematic. Some of them recover fairly quickly as they get on to fescue. We can shift the seasonality in which we bring those genetics in. But even at the end of the day, some genetics just aren't made for this part of the world. So one of the tools that I think a lot about is the hair shedding phenotype. So when in a season, an animal sheds their winter coat is a really good indicator of how they'll deal with that fescue stress as well as heat stress as we sort of move into the summer. So that hair shedding phenotype is a really good way. We like to score, it tends to be in May or June when you see the most variation. Some of those cows will be holding on to winter coat. Some of them will be nearly slick. Going through and trying to understand where everybody is in respect to one another can be a good indicator of how well they might be adapted to fescue and heat as it starts to turn on there in May and June.
Sure.
Any final comments on this?
Yeah, no, so we have this conversation a lot in the extension group, but if you could, boil down your program or your message to a phrase, what would it be?
Crossbreed,
easy. All right.
No, that's great. And I think that the thing I like the most about all of this, Troy and Katie, we have a chance to talk about these things, is at the end of the conversation, we always understand that the whole system perspective is very important, right?
Absolutely.
Even if you have the best bulls ever, if you have the best cow ever, if you don't have the right soil, the right nutrition, the right forage, the right management, you cannot put together a really nice livestock production system.
Absolutely.
So all of these things that we have been discussing here at the Livestock Podcast bring us to the main message that you gotta open all of these toolboxes and use whatever tool you have inside them to put them together.
Absolutely. And that's something that I always talk about, right? Is that the best genetics in the world, without proper nutrition, healthcare, management, aren't going to be able to express their genetic potential, right? And putting a low quality genetic animal in a perfect situation, you're still not going to see optimal performance, right? So it takes as much as I'd like to tell Katie that genetics is always more important than nutrition. It turns out that it takes both to make it happen. We've got to view all of this in a systems view. So I appreciate you putting those pieces together, Bruno.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Troy. Again, thank you, Katie, to help me out today again. I think it was, again, another great conversation here at the Livestock Podcast, sponsored by the University of Tennessee Beef and Forage Center. Hope you all, show up again next month for our next Beef and Forage conversation. Thank you all.